In 1968, Warsaw Pact tanks rolled across the border into the nation of Czechoslovakia. This later became known as the 1968 Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. The Russians viewed it as putting down a liberalizing country, while the Americans viewed it as an unjust war against a nation's sovereignty. But why? Why did the Warsaw Pact invade Czechoslovakia? This is Antonin Novotny. He's been president of Communist Czechoslovakia since 1957 and first secretary of the Communist Party since 1953. He's a communist hardliner. He absolutely loves the Soviet Union and has no problem with Czechoslovakia being a Russian puppet state. However, something is happening in Czechoslovakia which he is not okay with. The people are demanding reforms. In Czechoslovakia, two factions within the Communist Party began to form: the Communist hardliners, where Novotny found himself, and the reformers, where an important figure within the Communist Party, Alexander Dubček, found himself. The actual working people of Czechoslovakia were secretly tired of communism, and with Czechoslovakia being a puppet state, they almost unanimously began to support the reformers. Due to public support, Novotny feels the need to introduce some reforms to Czechoslovakia, but nobody's having any of it. His reforms are half-hearted at best and a slap in the face at worst. Because of this, Novotny is overthrown by Alexander Dubček as he becomes the new leader of Czechoslovakia. Dubček follows up on his past promises and begins introducing reforms in Czechoslovakia. Dubček began to reform Czechoslovakia in what became known as the Prague Spring. Dubček's socialism with a human face policies, including a complete freedom of speech where citizens were free to express their political beliefs, the legalization of other political parties aside from the communists, reducing the power of the secret police, introducing capitalistic elements to the economy, and helping people that had been wronged by the government. These policies weren't just in name either, they held up in practice. A scholar named Edward Goldstucker appeared in a television interview as the new head of the union. During the interview, he openly criticized Novotny, expressing all of Novotny's previously unreported policies and explaining how they were preventing progress in Czechoslovakia. Goldstucker suffered no repercussions. Dubček instead began to build a sense of trust among the media, the government, and the citizens. Leonid Brezhnev, leader of the Soviet Union, was livid. Brezhnev and the leadership of the Warsaw Pact countries were worried that the unfolding liberalizations in Czechoslovakia, including the ending of censorship and political surveillance by the secret police, would be detrimental to their interests. The first such fear was that Czechoslovakia would defect from the Eastern Bloc, injuring the Soviet Union's position in a possible Third World War with NATO. Not only would the loss result in a lack of strategic depth for the USSR, but it would also mean that it could not tap Czechoslovakia's industrial base in the event of war. Czechoslovak leaders had no intention of leaving the Warsaw Pact, but Moscow felt it could not be certain exactly of Prague's intentions. At first, Soviet leadership tried to stop or limit the impact of Dubček's initiatives through a series of negotiations. The Czechoslovak and Soviet presidiums agreed to a bilateral meeting to be held in July 1968 at Černá nad Tisou, near the Slovak-Soviet border. At a meeting with Brezhnev's leadership, Dubček defended the program of the reformist wing of the Communist Party, while pledging commitment to the Warsaw Pact and Comecon. Brezhnev decided on compromise. The Communist Party delegates reaffirmed their loyalty to the Warsaw Pact and promised to curb anti-socialist tendencies, prevent the revival of the Czechoslovak Social Democratic Party, and control the press by the reimposition of a higher level of censorship. In return, the USSR agreed to withdraw their troops still stationed in Czechoslovakia from June 1968. Dubček appeared on television shortly afterwards, reaffirming Czechoslovakia's alliance with the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. On the 3rd of August, representatives from the Soviet Union, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Bulgaria met in Bratislava alongside Czechoslovak delegates and signed the Bratislava Declaration. This declaration affirmed unshakable fidelity to Marxism-Leninism and proletarian internationalism, and declared an implacable struggle against bourgeois ideology and all anti-socialist forces. The Soviet Union expressed its intention to intervene in a Warsaw Pact country if a bourgeois system was ever established. After the Bratislava Conference, Soviet troops left Czechoslovak territory, but remained along Czechoslovak borders, as these talks proved unsatisfactory. The USSR began to consider a military alternative. The Soviet Union's policy of compelling the socialist governments of its satellite states to subordinate their national interests to those of the Eastern Bloc through military force, if needed, became known as the Brezhnev Doctrine.
News with Frank Reynolds. Evening. Once again, the Soviet Union, demonstrating a colossal contempt for the opinion of mankind, has resorted to brute force to keep a satellite nation under control. Russian tanks and infantry, aided by troops from East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria, have occupied Czechoslovakia and have crushed the new and relatively liberal leadership of that small country. The Czech news agency said tonight that Alexander Dubček, head of the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia, and other leaders of the reform movement have been taken to an unknown place by Soviet forces. Dubček reportedly was removed in an armored car.
Despite the Soviets clearly cracking down on their puppet states for deciding for themselves, East Germany decided to not send troops to Czechoslovakia, while Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania flat out called out the Soviets on the invasion and declined to send any support. The Czechs were also supported by China and Yugoslavia, as well as Albania. Despite this, the invasion was swift and was over the next day, August the 21st. The Soviets then introduced a period of normalization. This meant the arrest and exile of Dubček, installation of a pro-Soviet government, and reversing all of the policies introduced by the reformers. Now, more than 50 years on, we look back at this invasion as the Soviets refusing to give up any power in their puppet state. Czechoslovakia then went on to be hardline communist until 1989, before its eventual dissolution in 1993.